Hi everyone. Oh my goodness. I came on at 2 o'clock but went onto the wrong Instagram account. I was chatting all about fussy eating there. But my name is Tokes Arutere and I'm the founder at the Baby Cut Shop. And today we're going to be having a fun conversation about food and toddlers and fussy eating. So I'm going to wait for Sarah to join and Sarah, I think I see you. So if you do a request, there we go. Excellent. So this is going to be such a fun conversation because I've got 4 kids of my own and I suffered in the process of trying to shove food down. Hey, hi, Sarah.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. You're not going to believe what happened to me. I went onto my personal Instagram account and started so-called chatting with you there. I went live on the wrong account.
Oh dear.
I know, thankfully I got warned. I'm blaming it all on the Christmas spirit. So everything that happens going forward, it's all because of that.
Oh, and you've got a lovely festive background behind you. I can see it looks lovely.
Yeah. We've got I'm actually at the shop in Chelsea and it does feel very nice and Christmassy and it smells amazing as well.
Does it? Yeah. Oh,
How's
brilliant.
your day been?
Very busy. I've had back-to-back meetings most of the day, but yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for making the time for us. So we'll talk right in because I'm sure you have a lot more to catch up on. So if you're just joining us, which I hopefully you are, please hit the share button and invite your friends, mommy friends in particular, to come and join us because we're going to be chatting with Sarah Bushell, who is a dietitian and food nutritionist, child food nutritionist, isn't it? I'm going to let her introduce herself properly on fussy eating and how to cope with fussy eaters. So Sarah, please tell us exactly what it is that you do.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, my name's Sarah Bushell. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian for nearly 24 years. And I'm also an SOS trained feeding therapist. So what that means is I can help parents of children who are really fussy eaters. So, you know, ranging from what we would expect during the usual sort of toddler years right through to children who've got real problems with eating and drinking and food refusal. And essentially my mission is to try and make meal times less stressful, more fun, happy family times for families to enjoy.
Excellent. So it's actually possible for meal times with toddlers to be fun.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's start with the first question. Why are children fussy eaters in the first instance? I mean, we're only trying to help. We just want to feed them. We want them to grow. But then they spit the food out and they whine and they cry and they throw everything. Why is there such a thing as fussy eating?
Yeah. So I think the first thing for people to be aware of is it's the sort of normal toddler food refusal stage is a normal phase. It's actually a brain development. So babies go through this. Most babies go through it. Some don't because temperament plays a big role as well. So if you've got a baby or a toddler who's quite strong-willed, and then they also happen to be going through this developmental phase, that's when we can see fussy eating setting in. And usually it's short-lived. You know, they go through that phase, they come out the other side and they're fine. When it gets prolonged or it gets worse, it tends to be because of some of the strategies that we ourselves as parents have adopted in order to try and encourage them to eat, have backfired on us and actually have made the situation a little bit worse.
Okay.
So that's sort of the typical fussy eating. But there's only really 3 reasons why children don't eat. So the first one is sometimes they can't eat, so they might have a medical condition or haven't learned the skills to be able to move food around their mouths properly. The second one is that they won't eat because eating's really, really unpleasant, and these tend to be the children who've got sensory processing differences, so they might taste things differently to us, or noise might put them off, or the smell might be offensive. So things that we would say are fine, they might experience that in a very different way. And then the third reason are the children who are being prevented from eating, and that's, as I referred to, it's kind of often down to how we parent around meal times and all of those strategies that we might have adopted out of sheer desperation
in
order to try and get them to eat, but they've actually done the opposite.
That's interesting. I had never ever thought about that. I do know about well, I guess first slash second group of kids where there might be a medical condition. A good
Yeah.
friend of mine, her son's autistic,
Yes.
and so I saw that happening, and so I understand that part, but it just never crossed my mind that we could possibly be causing them to eat. Because I just, we grow up, and I just know that my mom was part of the clean plates club when
Yeah.
you said where you had to eat everything. And my experience with my first son, jumping the gun a little bit, was quite different in the sense that as a first time mom, you're worried about everything. You want to make sure everything goes right.
Yeah.
You've read so much about the experience of being a mom and the experience of raising a baby or a toddler,
Yeah.
and you have already pictures in your mind of things that could go wrong, along with
Yeah.
the fear that it actually will go wrong, and then you're now faced with this,
Yeah.
and the baby is. So how about where children are only interested in snacking, like, they literally just want a snack, and they don't want to eat proper food? How do you promote healthy eating? How does a parent do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the thing to remember there is you are the parent and the child is the child. And often what happens is when children are asking for snacks, constantly asking for snacks, it's totally okay to say no.
Mm.
Um, Not necessarily use the word no, but tell them, oh, that's a really great idea, but we'll have a snack after we've been to nursery or after we've had
Mm.
lunch or whatever it is. And so they can they understand that the snack is coming, but just not now.
Just not now.
So one of the things that being if you're trying to raise a child who has a really positive relationship with food and eats intuitively, one of the things that we recommend is having a really predictable meal and snack routine through the day. And it doesn't have to be set in stone in terms of timings or schedules or anything like that, but the predictability is really, really
Really
important.
what it is.
And
Wow.
again, it goes back to that brain development that children have, that they need to know when the next thing is happening so that they can feel assured and confident in themselves and in their family that they are going to get fed. So often I find that children who ask for snacks all day long tend to be those children who are not quite sure when the next meal or snack's going to be, or the other time I see it is when parents are very, very focused on healthy eating, and actually a lot of the healthy eating principles that we have to follow as adults don't really apply to children. And so they're hungry, they're missing out on nutrients, and their bodies are so good at telling them when they need nutrients that they will ask for food in order to get those missing nutrients. So sometimes it might be just having a look at what the actual content of the child's diet is. Because when your original question there about how can you teach healthy eating if all they want to do is snack, what I would say is actually you can't really teach healthy eating to a child at all. All you can do is lead by example. And then
That's
when they
right.
hit the teenage years, you can start teaching
Then
about healthy
hopefully,
eating.
yeah.
It's just too abstract for them when they're little. Or the other side of that is actually if you've got a child who is really quite a fussy eater, you want to just get them eating first, and then healthy eating
Then
comes,
locating later.
later. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. I wish I had you when I had my kids, because I didn't have to. I read every magazine, every blog, everything about raising kids, babyhood, and everything. But the reality is often different. And for a first time mom, you haven't, even with all of the knowledge you have, it does not support or does not take away the emotions that come with the uncertain emotions that show up when your child is here. So for example, I was so sure that I knew exactly what I was doing with my pregnancy, and I had a wonderful first pregnancy, no issues whatsoever, and headed to the labor ward and ended up having an emergency cesarean. So I think that was probably the beginning for me, where okay, everything you plan where babies are concerned never happens the
Never
way you
happened,
want
no.
it. Okay, so that's very helpful to know about snacking, because I remember watching a program where this little girl only ate Cheetos, like that's all she had. And the doctors just wanted her to have food, like just eat something. But eventually they did change, they persisted and they changed her diet and just stayed on top of it. And it's the crying and it's the whining, that makes it so hard for parents. Like, you just want them to survive. You just want to survive. I remember the first time I gave my second son a sweet, he was crying in his car seat in the car. And I think he was probably about 8 or 9 months old at the time. And I just like, you know what, here's a lolly, just keep you quiet. Because I thought I was losing it. So yeah.
And
But
it always comes from a good place,
yeah.
It's never, and part of the job that I do is, I never want a parent to feel shameful or blame themselves for anything like that they may have done that I then end up saying actually that possibly wasn't the best thing to do, because I think as parents we do the best job we can with the information we've got at the time. And sometimes there isn't a lot of information out there about feeding children. There's a lot of information about food and recipes and things like that, but when it comes to the actual feeding part and getting them to eat, there's very little stuff out there.
That's right. And then there's also just the feeling overwhelmed, as well. We've got to take that into consideration, and just worrying if you're doing everything right. So what happens, some children lose their appetites, like, so they've been, and we get that because the reason why we do these live videos is with experts like you is because our shop is a hub for moms and moms to be, and we get we hold tons of conversations with our customers about the stage that they're in, and we're sort of they lean on us for knowledge, for information, and for support. And so there are children who do lose their appetite. We've had customers say, you know what, they're doing, it's been a rough week. Like, they walk in and they look like it has been a rough week for them. She's not eating anything. She's been fine, and suddenly she's throwing everything out of a high chair and all of that. What can you do in a situation like that?
Yeah. So I think if it's appetite lost because they've been unwell, so I mean that's often, appetite is the first thing to go when children have got viruses and they're not feeling very well at all. And so if that is the case, the first priority is hydration. We want to make sure that they're not becoming dehydrated. So I'd always prioritize drinks and fluids and anything that they'll take over food. I think that's the most important thing. But if they will take food, if they can manage something, give them what that they like. Give them, don't worry about healthy eating. Let healthy eating go out the window. Just give them what that they like, because ultimately what we're trying to do is just giving them a little bit of nutrition, a little bit of energy, so that they can fight this bug that they've got and get better. And then when they're well, you can go back to your nutritious food, your routine, and everything that you were doing before. So I think if that's the reason that they're not eating, that's absolutely the right thing to do. I think if there's other reasons, it's worth exploring why. So one of the things that I do with my clients is always get to the bottom of the reason why the child's not eating first, because there's so many pieces of advice out there on the internet about what to do when your child doesn't eat, but actually none of it works unless you work out what the cause is, because the answer is going to be different depending on what the problem is in the first place. So the very first thing to do is try to get to the bottom of the reason why they're not eating, and then you can put the appropriate strategies into place from there.
Are you able to tell when it's due to sickness or just feeling unwell? Sometimes children don't display all of the symptoms of having a temperature or a cold, for example. How can you tell the difference? Like, imagine for a first-time mom who this has not even happened to before.
Yeah, so what I would look for is, if none of the obvious signs are there, like a temperature or a rash or whatever, I would look for sort of like a change in their energy levels, a change in their behaviour. So that's often, particularly with little ones, that's often the thing that we see. The word that people tend to use is they're just off colour. They're just not what they're normally like. So they're slightly quieter. They may not be, and I can remember doing this. I can remember saying to my daughter, "Oh, you're absolutely fine, and sending her into school and then phoning me and saying, "Oh, Mrs. Bushell, she's got a temperature of 40. And you think, "Oh my God." But so I think sometimes they're just slightly more subdued.
Yeah.
And, if there isn't anything obvious, it might be worth then just getting your thermometer out and checking, because
Just checking
sometimes,
it, you can't
it's,
tell the small changes in
yeah,
temperature. That's so true.
yeah.
That's great. So is there a timeline? Because you did say that it's a normal part of development. Is there a timeline to say when one can sort of expect them to start being fussy, and how long does it last?
There
Just
is
so
a
we
timeline.
so we go ahead and prepare our minds ahead of time.
Yes, there is an absolute timeline. So during that sort of weaning under one phase, most babies will eat anything, absolutely anything. They're a pleasure to feed. They make their funny faces and you can take the pictures, but then you offer that same food again, and then they're happy with it. At around about 18 months or so, sometimes it's a bit earlier, they can start to develop this thing called food neophobia. So this is that brain development that I mentioned, and it's essentially, food neophobia means a fear of food and a fear of eating. And it's actually a true fear response that they get. So they go into that sort of high adrenaline fight, flight, freeze mode when they're presented with food that's scary, that's fearful. And it's actually thought to stem from our caveman days. It's thought to be something that was a bit of a protective mechanism to stop these like inquisitive little people going out and poisoning themselves from picking beautiful berries off bushes and trying things.
It's
So
incredible.
yeah, I know, it's fascinating. So the neophobic phase can go on to about 3 most of the time, but with all cognitive development, the shift can take a couple of years. So sometimes it can be 5. So I often say to families, if they've started school and they're still going through this picky phase, that's when you want to have it investigated, really, because that tends to tell me that actually cognitively they should be coming towards the end of it, and if they're not, there may be something else going on with them. So between it's the toddler preschool years essentially that we're talking about.
You know what? I'm so glad you even exist, because this is all news to me. I had no idea. I did not notice a pattern. I mean, and it's funny that people say things like the terrible 2s or the terrible 3s, and these are the sort of reasons why that age group is labeled as terrible, when really it's just a normal cognitive development, like you say.
It is, and it's part of it is them learning who they are as independent from you, because before then they see themselves as part of you, and they only experience the world when they're young through their sensory systems and their motor systems, and then when they move into the next cognitive stage, there's a little bit more. There's actual thoughts happening, so thinking is happening, and they realize that they're an individual at that stage. So there's a lot of boundary testing, there's a lot of cause and effect. What happens if I do this? What reaction will I get? So there's lots of those sort of terrible 2s behavior. It's just totally to be expected.
Absolutely. Is there any advice you can give, so to a mom who is at the beginning stage? Baby is not fussy yet. They're still enjoying the textures and the taste and so on. So say they're about 16 months, and is there a way that we can start off on the right food? Maybe we can't prevent fussy eating because of all the reasons you've mentioned, but is there any way that we can start off on the right food to just kind of make the journey a little bit easier?
Yeah, there absolutely is. So you may have heard of something called the division of responsibility in feeding. And this is a philosophy developed by an American dietitian called Ellen Satter several years ago. And essentially it outlines the role of the parent or the caregiver and the child in the feeding relationship. So the parent's role is to decide on what the child's going to eat. So deciding what's for breakfast, lunch and dinner and snacks, and not saying to the child, what do you want
What
to
do
do
you
tonight?
want? Love that. Okay.
The parents' second job is to decide where they're going to eat. So whether it's out for dinner, around a kitchen table, picnic in the park. So they're deciding on the location. And then the third role that the parent has is to decide on when. So that's the routine of things. So that structure that I talked about having throughout the day. And then that's it. Parent's job is done. So the parent is not responsible for getting food into the child getting them to swallow and chew and, you know, eat. The child's job is that. So the child will then be able to, you know, provided the parents done their bit, they can decide whether to eat or not eat, because sometimes they don't. And really importantly, when to stop. And quite often when things go wrong is when the parent will either hand that responsibility over to the child by asking them what do they want to eat. The child's got really terrible nutritional knowledge, so they're never going to make a sensible decision. Or they try and take over the child's job, so the child doesn't want to eat or has stopped eating, and they're saying, oh, come on, just finish your peas, or 2 more mouthfuls, or you know what, if you clean your plate you can have ice cream for pudding. And what's happening there is you're teaching the child to ignore their internal body signals that tell them whether they're hungry or they're full or thirsty. And you're actually teaching a disconnect for appetite. So then, you know, I think we grew up in this sort of generation where we were encouraged to eat probably more than we wanted to. And what the research has shown is it's led to all sorts of different problems around not being able to identify when we're hungry or full, eating for, you know, other reasons, like to deal with negative emotions, feeling guilty for eating things when you think you haven't earned it, you know, so all sorts of emotional things that come into that.
You're giving some serious revelations here, and it makes sense. It really does.
It does. And what I would say is that sort of division of responsibility in feeding is brilliant from weaning. You know, if you can do that from the very start, that's really great. But what it doesn't do is provide a solution for fussy eating.
So it's better for moms who have not even got to that point yet. What's right. The name of the book again and the author?
Ellen Satter.
And
the division of responsibility in feeding.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the comment, because that's I feel like I need that for me. It's weird because growing up with my kids, I actually did. How did I do it? I fed them for as long as I could, and I thought that, you know, I passed the responsibility over to them only because I was either stressed or tired, or I have too much on my plate. At one point, I had 3 children, ages 3 and under. So I looked weird at the time. I looked like a mad woman. My husband would be off at work and I'm freaking out. And I just wanted him to come home so there could be another human in the house besides those little things there. But I remember I didn't do that. I only passed on responsibility because I was overwhelmed and I just really wanted them to grow up. The idea of them knowing when they're full, you know, it makes so much sense. And even now, the language we use as adults for ourselves is, oh, I've been good, so I'm going to have an ice cream.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, things like that. It never occurred to me until now that you said it, how much of that has to do with us growing up and the way that we were fed. So we were rewarded with sweets and treats and rewarded with food. And in my culture in Nigeria, we joke around and say that your mom tells you, an African mom tells their child that she loves her or loves him by saying, have you eaten? That's it. Like if you get into a spat with your parents, your mom, and she's really mad at you and everything, and she comes to you to say, have you eaten? It means all is forgiven. And I love you. So yeah, but that sort of relationship with food, associating certain foods with rewards and not knowing when we're full up because we've got to finish up. And it's only now as an adult that I stop myself from finishing everything on my plate. Because in my mind, it's waste. Like, why would you waste food? And I remember my mom would always say, there are starving children all over the world, you know, eat your food. And my thing was, but if I finish my food or I don't finish my food's not going to get to them. So I couldn't understand the logic behind finish your food. There are starving kids. Well, if I don't finish it, it's going to go in the bin. So how is that affecting anything? But anyway.
It doesn't make any sense, does it? No, absolutely. And I think that's the other thing as well is, you know, this is something I love to explore with parents is, you know, we all bring our own eating habits and our food beliefs to parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we don't even realize that we're doing things. It's just the way we interact around food in front of our children, and you know, our children are just absorbing all of this.
Right.
So even down to very basic things like, you know, if you don't like butternut squash, you're not going to buy butternut squash. You're never going to serve butternut squash. So your child's never going to grow up to then go on and eat butternut squash.
Yes.
So, you know, we have all of these likes and dislikes.
That's right.
But we also bring things like, you know, being told to clean your plate as the norm, as the culture, or things like using the word treat, you know, assigning a moral value to a food. What that does is it tells children that actually the sweet foods are the treats, and so those treats are higher value than the savoury food, which becomes like this horrible task that they have to endure to get that reward at the end of the meal. So it has a huge impact on the way children's relationship with food develops over time.
And obviously then affects who they are as adults as well.
Yes.
So we certainly need to break that cycle. And as adults, we can watch our language and watch our relationship with food and understand that whatever it is we're doing, we're basically teaching our kids, even if we don't use words.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, you know, one of the things I often say to families is if your child is a fussy eater, for example, and they're starting to sit down and eat something, and then you ask them a question, their brain makes them stop eating because they know that they're expected to answer a question, and so you've just stopped them from eating. You know, so there's lots of very, very small things that we probably do as parents. You know, I'm a parent as well, and we don't even realize that we're doing it, and it's almost until it's pointed out that you go, oh gosh, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah,
that is so helpful. Thank you so much. So how do I introduce new foods and discourage fussy eating? I know you've already said a lot of it anyway, but let's just the first part. How do we introduce new foods?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is extremely easy to introduce a new food. It is very hard to get a child to actually eat that new food. So going back to what I said before, it's not our job to get our children to eat. You know, that they are responsible for what they decide to put in their bodies. But what we can do is we can help them become familiar with that food.
Yes.
And so what we try and do is, so eating for all of us involves our sensory system. So we're using 8 senses, not just the 5 ones, you know, the sight, smell, sound.
What are the other 3?
Yeah, there's another 3. And there's actually 32 individual steps, sensory steps that children go through before a food becomes ticked off the list and accepted. So one of the things that we can do as parents is really, really help them become familiar with the food so that they become confident enough to then want to go and try it. And so that's where things like, you know, just seeing the food is really helpful. So if you're going food shopping, take your child with you. If you're preparing dinner, get them to sit in the kitchen as well. If they're old enough, get them involved so they can wash the lettuce or stir the soup, you know, whatever you're doing, so that they can get involved with it. And the more familiar they become, the more likely they are to go and try it. But that's a long game. And I think the main point here that, you know, the parent who's asked this question needs to know is that, you know, learning to like food can take a long time. And so you can't just introduce a new food and expect your child to eat it. They have to become familiar with it first. And the more familiar they become, the quicker that will be. And then the other thing to say in relation to that as well is, because the parent is always going to be the child's biggest role model, number one role model, who they look up to, they need to see you eating it as well. So if you're sat at the family table, you know, sit directly opposite them, eat that new food, and really overemphasize how much you're enjoying it. And if you do that repeatedly, and do all of the other stuff around familiarization, that's how you get children to like new foods.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. So can I then, would it be safe for me to add that it's okay for them to play with their food then?
Totally.
Yeah, because then they get used to the texture and the feel, and they feels familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. And often, you know, when particularly little ones are throwing food on the floor, that can be really frustrating for us as parents. But what the child's doing is going, where did it go? What noise did it make when it landed on the floor?
Yes.
What response did I get when I did that? So
Yeah.
that's all part of
So it's
learning as
all
well.
part of being familiar with food. So I think for some of the tweets, sarcastic mom is on Twitter. She's hilarious and she shares some of the tweets. And I've heard some of, I think we're actually going to start sharing them at the Baby Cut Shop on our social media because they're just funny and so real. And sometimes a newspaper or magazine or a blog will do a roundup of the funniest parenting tweets, and most of them have to do with food. My daughter threw a tantrum because she didn't like the way the strawberry looked, or
Yeah.
the tangerine winked at her, or something like that. Oh, little people are funny. They really are. Okay, so now growth cycle, is that related to? I know that there is a timeline, like we said, but is there a relationship with growth cycle and fussy eating?
Not necessarily fussy eating,
Or
but
their eating,
appetite.
yeah, their
Yeah,
appetite. Okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. So when children are going through their various growth spurts, they just need more nutrition, need more calories, and so they will have a bigger appetite. And then when things plateau, their appetite drops as well. So the really common time that we see this is after weaning, so around about their first birthday, actually.
okay.
So during weaning, babies, they grow really, really rapidly in that first year, don't they?
Yes,
And
yes.
then the time between their first birthday and their second birthday, their growth rate slows right down. And
Mm,
actually, when you compare their nutritional requirements, in terms of numbers, they actually need less in their second year than they did in their
really?
first year.
Okay.
So lots of parents will say to us, my child ate everything when they were a baby and they eat absolutely nothing now. And it can just be because that appetite
Oh
drop
my
has
goodness.
happened because their nutrient requirements are lower.
Okay.
So that's sometimes perceived as fussy eating, but it's not.
But
It's
it's
just they
not,
don't
no,
need as
yeah,
much.
they don't need
Yeah,
much food. That makes so
yeah,
much sense. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. We have some questions. So
yeah.
this is from Elvene. My little boy has huge sensory issues and will only eat rice cakes, two types of crisps, and turkey dinosaurs. That's it. Do you have some words for L?
Yeah, so with children who have sensory differences that affect their eating, they are not going to get better on their own. They need professional
Mm.
support. So you can access feeding therapy via the NHS. There's not many centres, but it tends to be the big towns like London will
Mm-hmm.
have a feeding therapy clinic. That's something that I offer. I don't want this to be a sales thing, but that's something that we do in my business.
Okay.
If
Good
the
to know.
NHS waiting list is very long, but yeah, when sensory processing issues are at play, these children don't eat. They're the ones who will, it breaks my heart actually when parents will say to me, they've been to the doctor 15 times and they've been told it's normal. They'll eat when they're hungry. And because these kids don't, these kids are the ones who end up, malnourished or having tube
Yeah,
feeds or relying on supplements just to sustain
that's
themselves.
right.
So if there are sensory issues, definitely seek some professional support.
And it just shows you the need for experts and professionals like yourselves, because we know that GPs and doctors don't know it all. They can't
Yeah,
possibly specialize in every single area. And so
yeah.
I'm glad we're having this conversation.
It's so true, actually. I spent
Mm.
22 years working in the NHS with some of the most amazing doctors and nurses and
Mm-hmm.
healthcare professionals. But the doctors, they didn't even get one day's worth of training in nutrition.
Mm-hmm. I can believe that. Wow,
Mm.
I can believe that. Okay, so some more questions from our audience. What do I do when my child freaks out at meal times? And I feel like this question is a very, very practical, like literally, my child is freaking out mealtime. What exactly should I do?
Yeah. So I think the first thing for this parent to know is that a child who's freaking out is actually experiencing a real spike in adrenaline. So what's happened there is they've gone into that fight, flight, freeze mode because something has triggered them to have that response. So often it's when mealtimes are really anxiety provoking or very stressful for the child. So what the parent needs to do is look at what's happening at that mealtime and identify what the triggers are and remove those triggers. Sometimes it's the parent themselves, and it sounds awful, and sometimes it's a little bit of tough love the way I'm having to say this, but sometimes it can be our actions, again, come from a really good place of trying to get our children to eat, but those actions of asking them to eat, strapping them into a high chair beyond the age that they should be strapped in, really trying to get them to stay there is the thing that's the trigger for that tantrum. So sometimes it's that, sometimes it can be external things that are going on. So it might be that if, for example, if they're sensitive to noise or sound, if it's a busy kitchen or the radio's on or the TV's on or there's just distractions there, that can just be too overwhelming for children. So it's really looking at the cause for that. But what I would say is, when we talked earlier about that division of responsibility in feeding and the parent's role being part of the second thing that they're responsible for in terms of where to eat, part of that is looking at the environment and making sure that the environment is pleasant. So we want the child to want to come to the table.
That's right.
Yeah. So it might be that parents need to do something in advance of the mealtime to, make it really calm. Settle it down. It can be playing some really nice, classical music in the background, just something for the ambience and the mood. Yeah. And also, if you've got, I've got teenagers, and sometimes they can get quite argumentative, and so if that sort of conversation starts to happen, it's knowing how to diffuse that and making that our job as parents to diffuse that so that the mealtime is pleasant, it's happy, it's nice. Yeah.
And I think also as mom is also be positive and just have great expectations and not make it, because we give off vibes as well, and we change the mood in the space, don't we? So imagine heading to mealtime and going, oh, gotta feed this one.
Absolutely.
You're wearing your belt, you strap it properly because you're going to war. Okay. My child decides he doesn't like the food just by smelling it. What advice can you give? I think you've sort of covered some of this, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so the fact is smelling it is actually really good, because those 32 steps to eating that I mentioned, smell's actually quite high up there. So there's a lot of visual stuff that they have to do. I think there's 7 steps in the visual stuff to be accepted, and then after that it's interacting with the food using cutlery and utensils and other things, and smells after that. So the fact that you're smelling it is actually a really positive thing. So what I would say, oh sorry, the sun's just got me. So what I would say is if he's at that stage, it may be that he is maybe sensitive to smell up close, but if it's further away on the table, that can be quite helpful for that familiarization process. So one of the things that I often advise families to do is, rather than pre-plate children's food, which goes directly in front of them, put everything on serving platters in the middle of the table, so it's that just a little bit further away, and then they can be in control of how much,
what they want. And that's a very good tip. Okay.
Yeah, and if there's something that they don't want or they're not familiar with yet, you can have just a little side plate and just put like a thumbnail sized amount of food on their side plate, so it's there for learning about, so they don't have to eat anything there, but they can look at, poke, prod, do whatever they want with it.
Whatever they want to do, but it's part of familiarizing. Excellent. I see that a few people have just joined us, so we're having the best ever, most revealing conversation about coping with fussy eaters with Sarah Bushell. And the good thing is we're going to post this on our platforms anyway, so you'll get to rewatch it as well as on our YouTube channel. But this has been so enlightening in every way. I'm rethinking everything I've ever known about feeding myself and my kids.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so someone says, I hope that, I'm not sure who asked this question, but I really hope that that was helpful for you. You are moving up the ladder, Sarah says. You're moving in the right direction. Him smelling his food is a good thing. So that is
a really good thing.
Excellent. When my son starts school, should I put him on school dinners knowing that there's a possibility that he's not going to eat anything?
Yeah, so I would say yes, because the possibility is that he's going to eat everything.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the ways that children learn to eat, I'm really sorry, the sun's really got me. I'm just closing my blinds here. One of the ways that children become conditioned to eat is through their what happens around them. So for example, they can become conditioned to not eat, or they can become conditioned to eat. And sometimes, you know, when people will say, oh, they'll eat nothing at home but absolutely everything at school, or, you know, they'll eat everything at granny's house and I'll get her to make the same thing and I'll present it at home and the child just will not eat that same food. It's to do with the conditioning. So what happened is essentially, and particularly if you know, parents have adopted some of these negative feeding practices out of desperation, is they've actually set the mealtime up to be a situation where children have learned that you don't eat at meal times. But at school, for example, you do. It will be set up to eat at meal times. So I would always suggest trying it, and you never know, it might be the best thing that you did.
Okay. And I also would refer back to what you said initially about being in control of the place and the time, and just being consistent in so that the child knows, your child knows when to expect food, and it puts you more in control, but it puts them in control of they're in control of putting the food in their mouth, but you decide everything else leading up until that point.
That's right. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
I was listening. I'm taking notes. Okay. Someone's asking a question about focus. How do I get my daughter to focus at meal times? Can toddlers even focus?
Yeah, so I think this is more around expectation, really. So what parents need to be aware of is that meal times and snack times for children are boring, totally boring. Yeah. What they do is they distract them away from that really fun activity that they were doing just beforehand, and they've got to come to the table and sit down and eat. So what they'll do is they'll eat whatever they need to eat, and then they'll want to get down and get back on with that more interesting activity that they were doing. So what I would say to this parent is just be realistic about your expectations for your child, and if they are, you know, over 1 and under 5, 10 minutes, that's the maximum amount of time that they're going to want to sit at the table and eat for. You know, some children will sit there and eat longer, and if they do, I'm certainly not going to say, you know, stop your timer at 10 minutes and make sure they get down. They can definitely stay there for longer, but don't try and keep them at the table for longer than that, because it's functional eating. It's an opportunity to get their fill, and then they're off. They don't want to sit around and have nice pleasant conversations with the rest of us.
Makes sense. So much sense. So it's about managing your expectations, really.
Totally. Yeah,
I find that seems to be, at least for me as a mom, you know, my whole motherhood journey from when I was a young mom it seemed like it was all about expectations, because I just had this feeling that I was being scored on how good I was as a mom. And I think a lot of moms feel that. And when you make the slightest mistake, you're like, mommy guilt. You feel so guilty.
Oh, you do.
I failed. Oh my goodness.
And it doesn't go away as they get older. It just changes.
It really doesn't. It actually doesn't go away. I've got teenage and young adults, actually. My boys are all big boys now. And, you know, it's still there. I'm still dealing with it. I have one son who is unwell, and he is a young adult, and I feel guilty that I'm in Chelsea instead of at home. Where I should be, so it never ends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think those are all our audience questions, but you've really gone through the whole thing you've done really well with, you know, just covering. I can't think of any other questions to ask, unless anyone on Instagram has a question. Do you want to throw a question in the comment for Sarah?
Let me check. I just had an awful feeling there that I'd joined with my personal account, but I haven't. That is my account. So if anybody has anything afterwards, I'm very happy to answer their questions.
Excellent.
Okay. Across a message, that's absolutely fine.
That's great. That's exactly what I did. I joined with my personal account and I began chatting away and thinking Sarah will be joining soon. But okay, so no additional questions except the one on sensory, which you've answered. And just scrolling through. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you, Sarah. So, Sarah, please, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram is The Children's Nutritionist. That's also the name of my business. Okay. I've got a massive blog. I've got a website absolutely packed full of blogs and recipes. So there's loads and loads and loads of free advice over there. It's just childrensnutrition.co.uk. And if you just type your question into the search box, there'll probably be an answer because there's 250 odd over there, so there's loads and loads of free stuff over there. So excellent. Yeah, that's the best place to go.
I'm gonna put the details onto the comment, below the video when we share the replay. Do you have time for one more question?
So yeah, of course.
Okay. Of course. If we wanted to learn a bit more about the 32 steps a child goes through for eating, where could we go?
So I teach that inside my membership. So I've got a membership club called the Happy Healthy Eaters Club, which it does cover fussy eating, but it's much bigger than that. It's about how to raise children to be happy, healthy eaters. So if you want more details about that, that's where you can get that. It's not really that widely available in the public domain because it's taught to us in our feeding therapy training. So if you type it into Google, you'll get graphics and things that come up, but not a lot of explanation around it. So that's where I would suggest you go if you really want to dive into that a bit more.
Excellent. I'll add that to the notes section as well. Well, thank you so very much, Sarah. This has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And thank you guys for joining us in our conversation. I know that it was helpful for you because it was revelatory for me. There's so much I do. Having mothered 4 children, and I know absolutely nothing. We're starting from scratch. But thank you all for joining, and you can head to our YouTube channel, which is all our channels are at the Baby Cut Shop, to learn more. And also I'm going to share Sarah's details at the bottom as well, so that you can go straight to her website and get all her information too. And we're based at 408 Kings Road in Chelsea, where we supply the most beautiful baby and children's furniture in the whole world. But we're also warm and friendly people, so if you need support and you just need a cup of coffee or to chat, you can pop in to see us. But have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. Bye for now.
You're welcome. Bye for now.